He was a tech billionaire who had everything, except the ability to be a man. For 3 years, he lived in the hell of impotence. Women left him one after another, doctors and specialists around the world failed. He could shake the financial markets, yet he could not hold the woman he loved as a man should. Until one rainy afternoon, an ordinary black cleaning woman accidentally stepped into his suite at a luxury hotel in Atlanta. She simply bowed her head, apologized, and quietly began to clean. But within just 5 minutes, his body reacted as if it had never been sick. He was stunned. She was terrified. Neither of them understood what had just happened. Why was it only her who could bring him back to life? The truth hidden behind that moment would either heal the shattered heart of a powerful man or destroy them both forever. Stay until the end of this story, because sometimes a single chance encounter can change destiny, and you won't believe what lies ahead for them. Share your thoughts in the comments and send this story to someone you love. Ethan Cole stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Atlanta penthouse. The skyline glittered beneath him, a city shaped by his influence, companies, and fortune. To the world, he looked untouchable. Yet, every night ended the same way, sleepless, restless, and hollow. The glass reflected back not a titan of technology but a man trapped inside his own success. The silence of the suite pressed down on him like a weight. He had conquered markets, negotiated deals, and signed contracts worth billions. But when the meetings ended, when the assistants left, when the city lights dimmed, there was no comfort waiting for him. He tried to remind himself of the achievements that once gave him pride. Awards lined the shelves. Articles praised his genius. Investors spoke his name with reverence. But none of it reached his heart anymore. Glory had become noise. Wealth had become another wall between him and peace. At night, when Atlanta was quiet, he would walk through empty rooms, past tables too large for one person, past doors that never opened for family. Success had given him everything, and in the same breath, it had taken away the one thing he needed most: rest for his soul. Dr. Elise Morgan closed the thick medical file with a quiet finality. 3 years of examinations, scans, and test results, every page filled with frustration. She looked at Ethan across the desk, her expression both professional and compassionate. "Your body is healthy," she said gently. "Your blood work is normal. Circulation, hormones, everything checks out. Physically, there is no reason for your condition." The words struck him like a verdict. He had invested millions in consultations, flown across continents, searched every possible cure, and now the answer was silence. Then why? His voice cracked, the question echoing louder than the room could hold. Why can't I feel what every man should be able to feel? Why did all of this break inside me? Dr. Morgan folded her hands. Sometimes trauma doesn't leave visible scars. It buries itself in the mind, and the body obeys the wound you cannot see. Ethan turned away, his eyes fixed on the sterile wall. The truth was more painful than disease. If there was no physical cause, then nothing he owned could fix it. The greatest hospitals, the best specialists, the power of his fortune, useless. He was a man alive, but living incomplete. That night, alone again in the penthouse, memories clawed their way back. 3 years had passed, but the images of twisted metal and flashing sirens refused to fade. It was the night his parents had died. They had rushed across town to reach him during emergency surgery after his accident. They never made it. A drunk driver, a red light, and a single phone call that shattered his world. He remembered standing in the hospital hallway, gown still tied at the back, IV needle fresh in his arm, when the doctor delivered the news. His legs had buckled beneath him. His success, his plans, his future, none of it mattered in that moment. Since that night, he carried guilt like a second skin. If he had not needed them, if he had not been so careless, they would still be alive. The thought grew like poison, eating away at every relationship, every attempt at intimacy, every breath of hope. The city saw a billionaire. Inside, he saw only a son who had failed the 2 people who mattered most. Trauma had not just broken his body, it had convinced him he no longer deserved love, and that belief had chained him in silence. The next morning, the silence was broken by a soft knock. A voice carried through the heavy door, gentle and polite. "Housekeeping." Ethan barely looked up. He had grown used to staff moving in and out, efficient and invisible. Yet when the door opened, something shifted in the air. Janelle Carter stepped inside. She wore the standard uniform, dark and plain, her hair neatly braided, her hands practiced from hours of labor, but her eyes. They carried a quiet kindness that seemed to brighten the corners of the room untouched by sunlight. She moved with simple grace, changing linens, folding towels, arranging small details. To her, it was routine. To him, it was different. For the first time in years, his chest eased. The weight of despair lightened. When she glanced at him and smiled apologetically for disturbing his space, Ethan felt something stir deep inside, a pulse, faint but undeniable. The ice that grief had carved into him cracked. It was not a doctor, not a treatment, not a miracle of medicine. It was the presence of a woman who carried her own struggles quietly, yet radiated strength. In that instant, his darkness met her light, and hope breathed again. Ethan sat frozen in his chair, trying to understand what had just happened. For 3 years, his body had been silent, unresponsive, locked in a prison of grief. Yet, within minutes of Janelle's presence, something shifted. It was not dramatic, but it was real. His chest expanded with the strength he thought he had lost forever. His pulse quickened, heat rushing through veins that had carried only cold for years. He pressed his palm against the armrest, steadying himself. Disbelief and relief fought for space in his mind. No doctor had achieved this. No therapy, no prescription, no specialist. And yet, 5 minutes with a hotel maid had awakened what billions of dollars could not. Ethan's throat tightened. He dared not speak, afraid the moment would vanish if named aloud. Janelle continued her work, unaware of the miracle she carried into the room. She hummed softly under her breath, folding linens as though she had been born for this quiet rhythm. For Ethan, the sound was more than routine. It was life. The impossible had happened. His body had answered, his heart had stirred, and hope, long buried under years of despair, rose like a fragile flame, refusing to die. That evening, Ethan called the hotel manager. His voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the resolve behind it. "I want Janelle Carter assigned to my suite, exclusively. No other staff." The manager hesitated. "Of course, Mr. Cole. May I ask if there was a problem with her service?" "No," Ethan replied quickly. "Her service was perfect. That's why I want consistency." He did not explain further. How could he? How could he describe that one woman's quiet presence had done what no medical empire could? To admit it aloud felt impossible. As he ended the call, he leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. This was not business. It was not strategy. It was a need he could not fully understand. He told himself it was about control, about stability during a chaotic season of board meetings and negotiations. But deep down, he knew it was something more. The decision was simple on paper, but it carried weight. For the first time in years, Ethan was making a choice not for shareholders, not for image, but for his own fragile heart. And that choice began with 3 quiet words. Only Janelle Carter. The next morning, Janelle entered promptly at 10. Ethan waited, almost nervously, as though anticipating a visitor more important than any business partner. She offered her polite smile. "Good morning, sir." He exhaled, steadying himself. "Please, call me Ethan." Her hands paused on the fresh linens. "I can't do that, sir. Hotel policy." "I'm requesting it," he said softly. "It matters to me." Janelle looked at him, uncertain. She studied his face, searching for motive. Finally, she whispered, "If that's what you prefer." "Ethan?" The sound of his name on her lips was electric. Not spoken with deference, not spoken with fear, just honest, simple humanity. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment the barriers between Billionaire and Maid dissolved. Janelle returned to her tasks, but the air between them had shifted. He was no longer "sir," no longer just the man behind a locked door. He was a person she saw, and being seen, perhaps for the first time in years, touched him more deeply than wealth or power ever had. It was a small word, 4 letters, but hearing it from her felt like the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. Later that day, conversation began to slip between them. Ethan asked questions not out of courtesy, but out of genuine curiosity. "Tell me about yourself, Janelle," he said quietly. She hesitated. Most guests never asked. But his voice carried no arrogance, only interest. "I've been here 6 months," she began. "I work days at the hotel, nights cleaning offices. My grandmother is sick. Diabetes, heart problems. The bills are heavy." Her words were steady, but her eyes betrayed fatigue. Ethan felt a knot tighten in his chest. She carried burdens far greater than her frame suggested. "You're caring for her alone?" "Yes. She raised me after my parents died. I owe her everything. I'll do whatever it takes." Ethan swallowed hard. Her story mirrored his own in painful ways. Both had lost family. Both had been shaped by tragedy. Yet she carried herself with dignity, not bitterness. He thought of the empire he commanded, of the fortune sitting idle in accounts, and felt ashamed. This woman, with nothing but resolve and compassion, stood stronger than he did. And in her voice, he heard something he had forgotten existed: courage wrapped in tenderness. That evening, as Janelle prepared to leave, Ethan spoke before fear could silence him. "There's something you should know," he said. His hands clenched at his sides. "For 3 years, I haven't been able to be with anyone, not in the way a man should. I've tried doctors, therapy, everything. Nothing worked." Janelle froze, unsure if she had heard correctly. Slowly, she turned toward him. His eyes held no pride, no defense, only vulnerability laid bare. "I don't tell people this," he continued, voice trembling, "but yesterday, when you walked into this room, it changed. My body responded. For the first time in 3 years. I don't understand why. I only know it happened." Silence filled the suite. Janelle's heart raced, but not with fear. She saw not a billionaire, not a broken man, but a soul asking to be seen without judgment. Finally, she whispered, "I believe you." Her gaze did not flinch. Instead, it offered something Ethan had long forgotten: acceptance. In that moment, the shame he had carried for years loosened. Not cured, not erased, but shared. And sharing made it lighter. Hope, fragile yet real, settled between them like a quiet promise. The weight of Ethan's confession lingered in the room. Silence pressed against them until Janelle spoke, her voice low but steady. "You're not alone," she said. Ethan lifted his eyes, searching hers. "My parents died when I was 16. Car accident. I was supposed to be with them that night, but I stayed home with the flu. Sometimes I wonder if I could have saved them. Sometimes I wonder if I should have gone with them." Her words cut through him like glass. The pain he thought no one could understand was mirrored in her. 2 lives broken by sudden loss, 2 hearts carrying guilt that refused to fade. "I've lived with my grandmother, Nana Ruth, ever since," Janelle continued. "She gave me everything she had. And now, I work so she can have the care she deserves." Ethan swallowed, his throat tight. In her story, he saw his own reflection. Not wealth, not titles, just grief, loneliness, and a longing to make sense of tragedy. For the first time in years, he felt less like a stranger in his own sorrow. Their wounds were not identical, but they echoed each other, weaving an invisible bond neither of them could deny. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that holds a fragile truth. Ethan moved closer, hesitating, unsure if he should. "May I?" he asked softly, extending his hand. Janelle's eyes widened, but she nodded. Slowly, she placed her palm against his. The moment their skin touched, both drew in sharp breaths. Warmth rushed through Ethan's body, not the forced heat of exercise or therapy, but something alive. It spread from his hand to his chest, filling spaces long empty. Janelle blinked, her lips parting. "It feels like coming home," she whispered. Ethan closed his eyes, letting the sensation wash over him. Electricity, yes, but gentler. Not a spark of desire alone, but recognition, as though their souls had been waiting for this connection. For 3 years he had felt numb. Now, life pulsed through him, undeniable, real. He opened his eyes and found Janelle watching him, not with fear, but with a softness that steadied his trembling. In that simple contact, the walls of grief cracked wider. Hope seeped in. It was not medicine. It was not science. It was human touch, and it had given him back a piece of himself he thought was gone forever. Janelle slowly pulled her hand back, though her heart still raced. She steadied herself, drawing a breath. "Ethan," she said firmly, "if we're going to spend time together, there have to be rules." He frowned. "Rules?" "Yes." She straightened, meeting his gaze without flinching. "We go slow, no rushing, no shortcuts, and you can't use your money or your influence to buy me or to control me." Her words were not harsh, but they carried strength. Ethan listened, struck by her resolve. Most people bent under his name, his wealth. Janelle stood unshaken. "You're not an employee when you're here with me," she continued. "You're a man, And if I'm going to help you heal, it has to be because you trust me, not because you own this place." Ethan nodded slowly. The weight of her boundaries was humbling. "I understand," he said quietly, "and I agree." Her shoulders eased, just a little. In setting limits, she had drawn a line between power and sincerity. And in honoring it, Ethan realized he wanted her presence not out of need alone, but out of respect. For the first time, healing began to feel possible. Days turned into a rhythm neither of them expected. Each morning, Janelle arrived at 10. At first, she cleaned in silence while Ethan worked at his desk. But soon, words began to fill the space between them. They shared meals on the terrace, food simple but warm. She spoke of childhood memories, of school she had to leave behind, of dreams of becoming a nurse. He spoke of late nights building his company, of victories that felt hollow, of the accident that still haunted him. The more they shared, the lighter Ethan's chest became. Laughter returned in small bursts, awkward at first, then genuine. Janelle's presence softened the sharp edges of his nights. His body responded, not just physically but emotionally. The frozen parts of him were thawing. One afternoon, he caught his reflection in the glass. The man staring back looked less broken. The lines of strain had eased. His eyes no longer carried only shadows. It had not been weeks of therapy or expensive treatments. It had been one woman's steady kindness, woven into daily life piece by piece. And as the days passed, Ethan began to believe healing was not just possible, but already unfolding before his eyes. The week ended with an unexpected sound. Ethan's phone buzzed insistently on the table. He glanced at the screen, and his face darkened. Victoria Langford, his ex-fiancée. The name alone pulled the shadow across the room. Memories of elegant galas, sharp words, and cold departures flooded back. She had walked away when his condition had consumed him, leaving him more shattered than before. The phone rang again. Janelle noticed the shift in his expression. "Is everything all right?" she asked gently. He forced a smile, though his jaw tightened. "It's nothing. Just someone from the past." But it was not nothing. It was a storm pressing at the door. Victoria represented the world he had left behind. Wealth, image, social circles where weakness was unforgivable. And now she was calling, uninvited, unrelenting. Ethan silenced the phone, but the unease remained. He had begun to rebuild fragile hope with Janelle, brick by brick. The last thing he needed was a ghost from his past tearing it down. For the first time in days, the air between them felt heavy again. Darkness had found its way back, not through grief this time, but through the voice of someone who once held power over his heart. Ethan agreed to meet Victoria in the hotel lounge, a space polished with marble and gold. She arrived before him, poised in a designer dress, her presence sharp as glass. "Well," she said coolly as he approached, "this is your new project? A maid?" Her words sliced through the air. Ethan stiffened, anger rising, but Victoria's smirk remained. "You disappeared from society functions, vanished from the circles that made you, and this is why? Because you're hiding away with the help?" The lounge was quiet, but Ethan felt every pair of eyes. To Victoria, status was the only language. To her, Janelle's uniform defined her worth. He clenched his fists beneath the table. "Janelle is not what you think." Victoria leaned forward, voice dripping with disdain. "She's exactly what I think. You, the great Ethan Cole, reduced to clinging to a woman who changes sheets for a living." Her contempt stung not for his pride, but for Janelle. Ethan wanted to defend her, but words felt too small against Victoria's venom. The past was standing in front of him, wrapped in diamonds, and it refused to recognize the quiet strength that had saved him. Victoria slid a sleek folder across the table. Ethan opened it, his breath catching. Photographs stared back, him and Janelle in quiet moments, on the terrace, sharing lunch, hands nearly touching. "You hired a private investigator," he said, voice low. "Of course," she replied smoothly. "You forget who I am." His jaw tightened. "This is an invasion." "No, darling, this is leverage. Here are your options." She tapped the photos with a manicured nail. "You have 24 hours to end this little fantasy. Send her away, forget she exists, and these disappear." Her smile sharpened. "Or refuse, and by tomorrow evening, these photos are on every tabloid front page. Billionaire and Maid. The story writes itself. Imagine your board's reaction. Imagine the market." Ethan's pulse thundered. This was not about him alone. Janelle's job, her safety, her dignity, all were at risk. Victoria leaned back, satisfied. You built an empire, Ethan. Don't burn it down for a woman who will never belong in your world. She rose, leaving the photos behind like a weapon primed to explode. The countdown had begun. 24 hours. One impossible choice. Back in the suite, Ethan's hands shook as he told Janelle everything. The photographs, the ultimatum, the threat hanging over them. Her face remained calm, though her eyes betrayed the storm inside. She gave us 24 hours, Ethan said. She'll destroy you, Janelle, your job, your life. I can't let that happen. He wanted to promise protection, but fear choked him. He had power in the world of business, but against Victoria's cruelty, he felt weak. Janelle looked away, staring out the window at the city lights. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, quietly, I need time to think. Ethan's chest caved. Think? Janelle, we don't have time. I know, she interrupted, voice trembling, but I need to decide what this means for me. For Nana, for everything I've worked for. If I choose you, I could lose everything else. Her words tore through him. He reached for her, but she stepped back. Please, just give me this night. The space between them grew heavier than silence. Ethan watched helplessly as she gathered her things and left. The door closed, leaving him in the same darkness he thought she had already banished. Janelle walked through the streets of Atlanta, the night air cold against her skin. Her thoughts collided in endless circles. She saw Nana's face, fragile and lined with years of sacrifice. She heard her parents' laughter in distant memory, silenced by tragedy. She felt Ethan's eyes, filled with pain and need, trusting her with wounds he showed no one else. Tears blurred the neon lights around her. What future could she choose? To stay meant risking scandal, humiliation, the collapse of the fragile stability she fought for. To leave meant breaking not only Ethan's heart, but her own. She wandered past restaurants closing for the night, past office towers glowing with empty light. Her feet moved without direction, carrying her deeper into thought. At one corner, she stopped, pressing her hand against her chest. She whispered into the night, "What am I supposed to do?" The city gave no answer. Only the echo of her own heartbeat reminded her she was alive. She cried quietly, the kind of tears that come from a soul stretched between duty and love. By dawn, her decision had begun to take shape, not out of fear, but out of something stronger rising inside her. The following evening, with 24 hours nearly gone, Janelle returned to the penthouse. Her steps were steady, though her heart pounded. Ethan stood by the window, his face pale with sleeplessness. When the door opened, he turned, hope flickering in his eyes. "I thought you might not come," he whispered. "I almost didn't," she admitted. The clock ticked between them. 23 hours and 17 minutes had passed since Victoria's threat. The final moments of choice hung heavy. Janelle drew a breath. "I've decided. I choose us." Ethan exhaled sharply, disbelief and relief colliding. "But listen," she continued, her voice firm. "We will not just survive her attack. We will not hide or beg for mercy. We will win." Ethan blinked, stunned. "Win?" "Yes. If she wants to destroy us with exposure, then we face it head on. We tell our story before she twists it, and we find her weakness, the truth she doesn't want revealed." Her eyes burned with determination. She was no longer just defending herself. She was fighting for both of them. Ethan stepped closer, his heart breaking open at her courage. Together, they would not merely endure, they would fight, and they would overcome. Janelle's voice carried certainty as she outlined the plan. Ethan listened, astonished by the clarity in her eyes. "Step 1, she said. "We go public with the truth, not Victoria's twisted version, but our own. We tell the world about us, honestly, openly." Ethan nodded slowly. "And step 2? "We expose her," Janelle replied. "She hides behind money and power, but no one stays that clean. There's always a trail. If she wants to use her influence to destroy us, we use her secrets to end her control." Ethan leaned closer. "And step 3? Her lips curved into a faint smile. "We marry. Before her deadline. She can't threaten to expose something we've already celebrated." He exhaled, the weight of fear lifting for the first time in days. Her strategy was bold, almost reckless, but it gave them a way forward. "You've thought this through," he whispered. "I had to," Janelle said firmly, "because love isn't just about surviving storms. It's about standing together in them." For the first time, Ethan saw not just the woman who healed him, but the woman who could lead him into battle, and he knew he would follow her anywhere. Later that night, Ethan revealed the weapon he had been holding in silence. "I already suspected Victoria was hiding something," he admitted. "I hired a forensic accountant months ago." Janelle's brows furrowed. "And?" "She's been embezzling," Ethan said, his voice hard. "Funds meant for children's hospitals, cancer research, programs for kids who need it most. Hundreds of thousands redirected into her private accounts." Janelle's hand flew to her mouth. "She's stealing from children?" He nodded grimly. "Every transaction is documented. Every wire transfer traced. I have proof strong enough to bring her down completely." Anger burned hot in Janelle's chest. This was more than a personal vendetta. It was cruelty against the innocent. "Then we use it," she said firmly. "Not just to protect us, but to protect them. Every child she's stolen from deserves justice." Ethan reached for her hand. "We'll release it when the time is right. With the truth about us and the truth about her, she won't know what hit her." In that moment, Janelle realized this was bigger than their survival. They were fighting for more than love. They were fighting for lives that had been silenced by greed, and that gave her strength. The next morning, they made their move. Ethan called a press conference, something he had avoided since his illness began. The room filled with reporters, cameras flashing, pens ready. He took the podium, Janelle at his side. For a moment, nerves threatened to silence him. Then he spoke. "For years, I've lived behind walls of wealth and image. But the truth is, I've been broken. 3 years ago, tragedy took my parents and left me unable to feel alive. Doctors could not heal me. Money could not fix me. But one woman did." He turned toward Janelle, his voice steady. "This is Janelle Carter. She is not from my world of privilege. She is stronger than I've ever been, and she gave me back my life." Gasps rippled through the room. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras zooming closer. Janelle's cheeks flushed, but her eyes held firm. She spoke quietly, yet every word carried. "Love doesn't care about status. It only asks if we're willing to see each other, truly see each other. That's what Ethan and I found." Within hours, the story spread. Headlines shifted from scandal to inspiration. The world did not mock them. It leaned in, listening, moved by something genuine. That evening, with the press still buzzing, Ethan and Janelle stood in the small chapel inside the Ritz-Carlton. The room was modest, a handful of candles flickering, the hotel manager and his wife serving as witnesses. There was no orchestra, no crowd of dignitaries, only vows whispered between two people who had survived storms together. Ethan took her hands, his voice breaking. "For 3 years, I believed I was broken beyond repair. Today, I know I was only waiting for you. Janelle, I promise to honor you, to fight for you, to choose you every day." Tears shimmered in her eyes. "Ethan, I don't need wealth or titles. I only need the man who found the courage to trust me with his truth. I choose you, always." The manager pronounced them husband and wife. Their kiss was soft, but it carried the weight of everything they had endured. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm. Inside, two souls had rewritten their story, not as billionaire and Maid, but as partners, bound by something money could never measure. It was sudden, it was unplanned, but it was theirs. And, in its simplicity, it was perfect. The next morning, Victoria made her final move. She dialed Ethan's number, voice sharp with fury. "You think you've beaten me? The media will devour you both. Your empire will fall." Ethan listened silently, Janelle beside him. Then another call came through. This time, it wasn't Victoria. It was federal agents. Within hours, FBI officials walked through her penthouse doors. Documents in hand, warrants signed, they searched every corner. The evidence of embezzlement, fraud, and theft from children's charities was undeniable. Victoria's phone rang again, this time to silence. Her threats collapsed beneath the weight of handcuffs and flashing cameras. In their suite, Ethan turned to Janelle, a slow smile breaking across his face. She answered with one of her own. The war was over. Together, they watched the news broadcasts that evening. Not of scandal, not of shame, but of justice served. Headlines showed a fallen socialite, her crimes exposed, while another story rose alongside it. The love of a billionaire and a maid who refused to be broken. For the first time in years, Ethan breathed without fear. Beside him, Janelle rested her head on his shoulder. They had not only survived, they had won. Weeks after their wedding, Ethan and Janelle launched something bigger than themselves, the Love Without Limits Foundation. It began quietly, a press release, a mission statement. But the heart of it was simple. helping workers who had sacrificed education for survival, hotel maids, grocery clerks, construction workers, people with dreams deferred by necessity. Applications poured in, letters handwritten by tired hands, stories of parents who wanted to finish school, children who needed role models, workers who wanted more than endless shifts. The foundation answered. Hundreds of scholarships were granted in the first year. Some recipients cried when they learned. Others sent photos in caps and gowns, thanking strangers they would never meet. For Ethan, the numbers mattered. Millions invested, hundreds lifted. But for Janelle, it was personal. Each story reminded her of her own past, of nights she had scrubbed floors and cleaned rooms, her nursing degree left behind. Now she could give others what she had lost. Together, she and Ethan turned their pain into purpose. The empire he had once built for profit was becoming a tool for healing. Love had saved them. Now it was saving others. One evening, Janelle placed Ethan's hand gently on her stomach. He blinked, confused, then froze as realization dawned. "Are you?" She nodded, tears in her eyes. "We're having a baby." For a moment, Ethan couldn't breathe. Then emotion crashed over him. His shoulders shook. He buried his face against her, sobbing with joy. "You've given me back my life," he whispered. "And now, you've given me the future." They sat together on the couch, laughter and tears mingling. The man who once believed he could never be whole again now dreamed of lullabies and small footsteps. Janelle brushed his cheek, smiling through her own tears. "This child will know love, real love, not money, not power, just love." Ethan held her tightly, marveling at the miracle. For years, grief had been his only companion. Now, in Janelle's arms and with new life growing within her, he felt something greater than hope. He felt legacy. The miracle was not only survival, not only healing. It was creation. Life where once there had only been silence. 6 months later, under the bright lights of a hospital room, their daughter was born. They named her Hope. Ethan held the tiny bundle, his voice breaking. "She's perfect." Janelle, exhausted but radiant, whispered, "She's ours. Our miracle." News traveled fast. The press had followed their journey, skeptical at first, but headlines now read differently. "Love beyond class. Billionaire and Maid welcome baby girl." Photos of Ethan cradling Hope, Janelle smiling softly spread across the country. For once, the story was not about scandal. It was about love strong enough to create life. Hope became more than a name. She became a symbol of healing, of new beginnings, of the bridge between worlds that many believed could never meet. In the nursery, Ethan rocked her slowly, marveling at the weight in his arms. "She will never know the emptiness I once carried," he promised. Janelle smiled, watching him. The man who once lived only for profits now lived for bedtime stories and morning smiles. Their love had already touched thousands. Now it had touched their own blood. Hope's cry was not just the start of her life, it was proof that healing could pass to the next generation. 5 years later, the Georgia World Congress Center buzzed with voices. Banners stretched high. Love Without Limits Conference. What began as a foundation had grown into a movement. Thousands filled the hall, couples from every background sharing stories of how they had crossed boundaries of class, culture, or circumstance. On stage, Ethan and Janelle stood side by side. Hope, now 4, clapped from the front row, sitting proudly with Nana Ruth. Ethan spoke first. "5 years ago, I thought my life was over. But one woman taught me that healing comes through connection. Today, we see proof of that truth in every story you've shared." Janelle's voice followed, warm and strong. "Love doesn't ask for your bank balance. It doesn't measure your status. It asks if you're willing to see another person's heart. And when you do, walls fall." Applause thundered through the hall. Couples wept. Others held hands tighter. The conference wasn't about Ethan's billions anymore. It was about legacy. What they had built was larger than their names. It was a community that refused to let love be defined by barriers, and it was only growing stronger. A billionaire once lost in grief. A black woman carrying her own scars. 2 broken lives that found each other in the most unlikely place. Ethan had everything the world could offer. Money, success, power, but he could not feel alive. Janelle had nothing but hard work and love for her grandmother, yet she carried a strength he could never buy. When their paths crossed, healing began. They didn't stop at saving themselves. Together, they built a foundation that gave workers a chance to dream again. They welcomed a daughter named Hope, proof that love can create new life from ashes. And they sparked a movement that grew far beyond their names, showing the world that love does not ask about status. It only asks if we dare to see each other's hearts. Their story reminds us that the greatest miracles are not found in wealth or fame, but in love that heals wounds no power can touch. Do you believe love can heal the unhealable? If you do, share this story so it may reach someone who has forgotten hope. And stay with us, because more stories await, stories that will remind you that miracles still live in ordinary hearts. Amara screamed in agony, clutching her stomach as blood stained her white nightgown. The cry ripped through the night. "Julian, help me!" Julian rushed to her, his heart stopping cold. He lifted her into his arms, running through the freezing rain, begging for a miracle. But hours later, the doctor stepped out, his eyes heavy, his voice sharp as a blade. "We're very sorry. The baby didn't make it." Julian collapsed. The world collapsed with him. Amara left, carrying a broken heart. And a silence nothing could fill. 3 months later, 11:47 p.m. Julian's phone rang, shattering the stillness of his penthouse. The doctor's voice trembled. "Mr. Cross, Amara is in labor. Not just one, but 2 children. One of them is in critical condition." Julian froze. The truth hit like lightning. The child they lost was only half the story. The other half, life itself, was still fighting inside the woman he loved. Now he must race against time, to win back love, to protect family, before losing everything again. If it were you, would you forgive? Share your thoughts in the comments. Julian Cross was 37 years old, and his name carried weight across 3 continents. His empire of luxury hotels rose like monuments to wealth, places where chandeliers glittered and marble echoed under expensive shoes. In every photo spread, he looked unshakable. Sharp jaw, cold eyes, perfectly tailored suits. But when the lights went down and the applause faded, there was only silence. He had boardrooms filled with men who nodded, assistants who obeyed, investors who worshipped numbers. Yet none of them knew him, not really. Julian had once believed success would protect him from loneliness. That money could shield him from the ache of being unwanted. But nights alone in his glass tower told a different story. He could conquer markets, crush rivals, and still return to an empty home where even the echo of his own footsteps felt too loud. People called him ruthless. They said he lived for power. Maybe it was true. Or maybe it was easier to wear that mask than admit how hollow life had become. Behind every deal, every triumph, there was the same question he never allowed himself to ask. What good was all of it if he had no one to share it with? His office stood on the 72nd floor of Cross Tower, overlooking Manhattan like a throne above ants. Down below, millions hurried through the city streets. From his height, they looked small, manageable, insignificant. That was how Julian preferred the world. Under his control, the walls of glass gave him everything he thought he wanted, a kingdom of steel and light. Silence that no one dared break. Assistants spoke through intercoms, never stepping closer than necessary. Every meeting was scheduled, every smile calculated. Julian trusted numbers, not people. Numbers never betrayed him. Balance sheets did not abandon him. Profits did not lie. So he buried himself in spreadsheets and acquisitions, each deal another layer of armor. Love, to him, was a liability, a distraction, something that could unravel everything he had built. Better to stay untouched, better to remain untouchable. Yet, deep inside, he felt the frost spreading. The city outside pulsed with life. Couples holding hands, children laughing, friends calling across the street. He could see them, but never feel them. His empire was vast, his wealth unshakable. And still, as he stared down at the world, Julian Cross realized he had built himself a cage of glass, colder than winter itself. The conference room filled with quiet footsteps as a design team entered, carrying tablets and rolled-up portfolios. Julian barely glanced at them. He had seen 100 of the same. Polished professionals, eager to please, terrified to fail. Then his gaze stopped. At the back of the group stood Amara Ellis. Dark hair tied neatly, simple navy blazer, posture calm. Her eyes were steady, focused on the blueprints instead of on him. No trembling hands, no nervous smile, just quiet confidence. Julian noticed the absence more than anything. No fear, no rehearsed admiration. She treated the plans with more respect than she treated him. and that was new. While the others shifted under his cold stare, Amara did not flinch. Her presence seemed to cut through the sterile air of the room, as if she had carried in a piece of warmth from another world. For a moment, Julian felt unsettled. Women usually sought his attention, or avoided it altogether. She did neither. It was only a flicker, a pause in his routine. But deep down, something stirred. He didn't know her yet. Still, in the stillness of her gaze, Julian sensed the beginning of a story that would not leave him untouched. The presentation began with polished slides of lobbies lined in marble, chandeliers dripping with crystals, hallways gleaming like mirrors. The kind of wealth that impressed most men. Julian leaned back in his chair, unmoved. He had seen it all before. "This is garbage," he said at last, his voice sharp as glass. "Generic, soulless, forgettable." The room fell silent. The lead contractor's face drained of color. No one spoke. Then Amara stepped forward. "You're right," she said calmly. No apology, no defense, just agreement. Her voice held no tremor, only quiet conviction. Julian's brows rose. No one had spoken to him like that in years. Amara connected her tablet to the projector. Images filled the wall. Warm wood, stone fireplaces, windows opening to mountain skies, spaces that breathed comfort, not intimidation. "The Aspen Ridge Resort should feel like coming home," she explained. "Luxury is not always gold and marble. Sometimes it is peace. Sometimes it is belonging." For the first time in months, Julian leaned forward. The designs pulled something from him he thought long buried. They whispered of life, of warmth, of places where emptiness had no power. In that moment, the meeting changed. And so did he. The room emptied, leaving only Julian and Amara. Her designs still glowed on the wall, warm against the sterile glass and steel around them. Julian paced slowly, his eyes sharp, testing. "Why should I trust you with $50 million?" His tone was calculated, the same tone that had broken seasoned executives. Amara didn't flinch. Her smile was not a performance but something genuine, touched with quiet humor. "Because you're tired," she said softly, "tired of beauty that makes you feel nothing." The words struck him harder than any challenge. For years he had surrounded himself with perfection. Yet here she was, pointing at the hollowness he carried like a shadow. Julian stopped walking. Silence stretched between them, heavy but alive. He searched her face, waiting for calculation, for some hint of manipulation. But there was only honesty. It was dangerous, that honesty. Rarer than diamonds. It unsettled him because it slipped past his armor and pressed against the part of him he refused to name. Loneliness. For the first time in years, Julian felt the ground shift under his feet, and it came from one woman daring to say aloud what he had hidden inside. 2 days later, Julian boarded his private helicopter. Across from him, Amara Ellis sat quietly, sketching revisions in her notebook. She had not spoken since takeoff. Most people filled silence around him with nervous chatter or hollow praise. Amara did not. She was absorbed in her work, as if his wealth, his power, meant nothing. Julian studied her, the hum of rotor blades filling the space between them. "You're not impressed by helicopters," he said finally. "I'm more interested in what we're building than how we get there," she replied, still sketching. Then, with the faintest trace of humor, "Unless you always travel with your architects, am I getting special treatment?" Her tone was light but not flirtation. It was something different, something that brushed against the walls he had built. For a moment, Julian almost smiled, but then he caught himself, retreating to his controlled expression. "I don't trust projects unless I watch them unfold." Amara looked up at him then, steady, unafraid. "Fair enough," she said, "but I work better when I'm not treated like a suspect." The words lingered, calm, honest, unshaken. And Julian realized she was unlike anyone he had ever brought into his world. The helicopter descended into the valley where Aspen Ridge was rising from stone and pine. Half-built structures stretched across the land, skeletons of what would soon become luxury. Mara stepped onto the gravel without hesitation. She moved toward the main building, her boots crunching, her eyes scanning every detail. Julian followed, intrigued despite himself. "The foundation is solid," she said, running her hand along a stone wall. Then she stopped, pointing to a row of windows. "But these are wrong. They chase the view, not the light. In winter, half the rooms will sit in shadow." She pulled out her tablet and redrew the angles, quick strokes reshaping months of planning. Her hands were precise, her focus intense. Julian frowned, though without his usual sharpness. That means tearing down 3 weeks of work. It means building something worth remembering, Amara answered calmly. Your call, fast or right? The foreman, Dalton, approached with concerns. Yet even he paused to watch Amara crouch by the future pool, measuring with her hands. She spoke to every worker she met, listening, questioning, respecting. Julian stood back, watching her connect with people he barely noticed. And against his will, he felt something shift. Admiration. The helicopter would not return for an hour. Julian suggested coffee. Amara raised a brow, surprised, but agreed. 10 minutes down the mountain, they entered a small diner with red vinyl booths and checkered floors. Julian almost recoiled. He lived in a world of Michelin stars and private dining rooms. But Amara slid into a booth like she belonged there. She ordered black coffee and apple pie. You've been here before, Julian observed. Last week, she said. Mabel makes the best pie in 3 counties. You should try it. I don't eat sugar. Of course you don't. Her smile was gentle. Discipline builds empires, Julian. Joy builds lives. They aren't enemies. She pushed the plate toward him. One bite won't destroy your empire. Against reason, Julian lifted the fork. The pie was warm, sweet, with cinnamon that awakened a memory long buried. A kitchen from his childhood. Laughter. Safety. He had not tasted joy in years. Yet, here it was, offered casually across a table in a diner that smelled of coffee and frying oil. For the first time, Julian wondered if his empire had cost him more than he could ever admit. Julian set down the fork, his chest tight. He wanted to dismiss it, to fold the moment away as insignificant. But Amara was watching him with quiet curiosity, not pity, not admiration, just presence. He realized then he felt seen, truly seen in a way that had eluded him for years, not as the billionaire, not as the empire, simply as a man who had forgotten the taste of pie. Amara spoke of her childhood in Colorado, of hiking trails and hand-built cabins, of her dream to design spaces that felt alive. Julian listened, more than he had listened to anyone in years. Her voice carried warmth, unguarded. When he spoke of the resort, he heard himself sharing not numbers but hopes, a vision of creating something that would matter beyond profit. Amara smiled at him then, not the polite curve she gave in meetings, a real smile, unguarded, soft, almost luminous. Something cracked inside Julian, like ice under spring sunlight. Small, but undeniable. He caught himself almost smiling back. Almost, until he remembered who he was supposed to be. But the crack remained, and it frightened him more than any business risk ever had. Days later, a storm blanketed Manhattan in white. Streets turned quiet. The city softened under snow. Amara could not reach her studio, so she requested to work from Julian's office. Without thinking, he said yes. Within an hour, a conference room near his own had transformed. Sketches spread across tables. Fabric swatches lay beside her laptop. A thermos of soup rested near stacks of material samples. Julian paused at the doorway. Amara wore a soft sweater instead of her blazer, her hair loose, glasses perched on her nose. The room looked alive in a way his sterile office never had. "The storm will last all day," he said. "You could have worked from home." "I wanted to show you something," she replied. She turned her screen toward him, a new rendering of the resort lobby. It was warmer, more intimate, shaped by details he had once spoken only in passing. "This is—" Julian struggled. "This is exactly what I imagined but could never say." "That's my job," Amara answered simply. "To take what you dream and make it real." The snow fell outside, but inside, Julian felt the first stirrings of something he had never trusted, hope. By noon, the smell of soup filled the room. Amara opened her thermos, ladling it into 2 containers. Vegetables, herbs, broth rich and steaming. "When's the last time you ate something not prepared by a private chef?" she asked lightly. Julian could not remember. "I made too much," Amara said, handing him a portion. "My grandmother's recipe. She always told me, soup is love you can taste." Julian hesitated, then tried it. The warmth spread through him, simple and nourishing in a way no gourmet dish had ever managed. Each spoonful tasted of care, of something beyond survival. Amara spoke of her grandmother's farmhouse, of gardens and nights filled with laughter, of lessons in patience and resilience. Her voice carried both grief and joy, intertwined like threads in a quilt. Julian listened. For once, he didn't think of contracts or schedules. He thought only of the woman across from him and of the strange fullness in his chest. Wealth had given him everything except this, the feeling that someone cared enough to cook, to share, to remind him of humanity. In that moment, he realized, all the money in the world could never buy the warmth of a bowl of soup. The storm deepened, snow swirling like white fire beyond the glass. By late afternoon, Julian's assistant knocked to remind him of meetings, a quarterly review, a call with investors, a board update. "Cancel everything," Julian said. His voice was calm, certain. "No one needs to risk the roads tonight." The words startled even him. For years, work had come before anything. Weather, fatigue, even health, none of it excused delay. Yet now, looking at Amara bent over her sketches, he felt clarity. For once, people mattered more than profit. She raised her head, surprised. "Everything? Don't you run an empire?" "It will survive one day without me micromanaging." Outside, snow buried the city in silence. Inside, warmth grew in a conference room filled with drawings and soup containers. For the first time in years, Julian had chosen presence over power. Something fragile, almost invisible, shifted between them. Not a declaration, not even a promise. Just the quiet knowledge that he had broken his own pattern, and she was the reason. As evening settled, the storm wrapped the city in stillness. Amara stretched, leaving her pencil aside. Her eyes caught Julian's, and for once he did not look away. "I never knew my grandparents," he admitted, voice rough. "My parents were too busy building the business. They kept moving, always chasing something. Then, when I was 22, they died in a car accident. I learned that caring only makes life more dangerous. Love just gives fate more ways to hurt you." Amara listened quietly, not with pity, but with presence. Her silence invited honesty. "That must have been lonely," she said at last. The word cut through him like truth. He had called it discipline, focus, control, but she named it for what it was. "There's a difference," Amara added softly, "between solitude and emptiness. One is peaceful, the other just hollow." Julian held her gaze, feeling something unravel inside. For years, he had drowned his fear with work, with money. Yet here, in the glow of desk lamps and falling snow, Amara's words pierced the armor. For the first time, he allowed himself to admit it. He was lonely. The storm cocooned the city through the night. In that small conference room, life felt different. Julian and Amara worked side by side, debating design choices, laughing at small mistakes, sharing glances that lingered too long. At one point, Amara offered him half of her sandwich. He accepted without protest, surprising even himself. They ate in companionable silence, the kind that felt full instead of empty. Julian found himself watching her when she wasn't looking, the way she tucked hair behind her ear, the way her hand moved quick and sure across the paper. She worked with passion, but not hunger for power. It was love for creation itself. He felt lighter, as if the snow outside had buried his old self under its weight, leaving space for something new to rise. Hope. Amara looked up, caught his eyes, and smiled. It was small, but it held the possibility of spring in the dead of winter. That night did not end with grand gestures or declarations. Only quiet laughter, shared warmth, and the fragile beginning of something that both terrified and comforted Julian Cross. The warmth of that snowstorm lingered for days. But, one evening, as they worked late, Amara's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and her face changed. Color drained, her hands trembled. "My father fell," she whispered into the phone. "Internal injuries. I need to get to Denver." Julian froze, then moved with sudden urgency. He called his assistant, voice steady but sharp. "Prepare the jet. Call Dr. Morrison. Find me the best trauma surgeon in Colorado." "Julian, no. This is too much," Amara protested. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," he interrupted. His gaze was firm, softer than she had ever seen. "Your father is hurt. Nothing else matters." Within an hour, they were in the air. Amara sat silent, staring out the window, her fingers wrapped around a cup of untouched tea. Julian sat beside her, close enough to offer comfort, but silent enough to respect her fear. He watched her fight for composure, and something inside him shifted. For once, his wealth was not about power or control. Tonight, it was about care. And for the first time, Julian Cross used his empire not to protect himself, but to protect her. The hospital in Denver smelled of antiseptic and sleeplessness. Amara's mother waited with red-rimmed eyes. The surgery went on for hours. Julian stayed, Not in the lobby, not in a car outside. He sat with Amara through every minute, his hand steady near hers, his voice quiet when she faltered. He had never done this before. His nights were usually spent in boardrooms, at gala dinners, in penthouses of glass and silence. But now, he sat in a plastic chair in a fluorescent hallway because she needed him. At 2 in the morning, Amara's father was declared stable. Relief washed over her, leaving exhaustion in its place. She drifted asleep in the hard chair beside her father's bed. Julian remained awake, watching her face soften in sleep. Her strength, her fragility, the quiet way she carried everything. For the first time in his adult life, Julian Cross stayed awake all night, not to save a deal, but to stand beside a woman. And as dawn bled through the hospital windows, he realized he did not regret a single second. Morning came slowly. Amara woke to find her father resting, her mother calmer, the worst behind them. When she stepped into the hallway, Julian was there, speaking quietly with the surgeon he had summoned. She approached, weary but grateful. "You didn't have to stay." "I had nowhere else to be," Julian answered simply. Their eyes met. The corridor was filled with nurses, doctors, the hum of machines. Yet for a moment, the world narrowed to just them. "You haven't slept," Amara whispered. "Neither have you." He hesitated, then added, "I'm used to it." Amara looked at him, really looked, and in his guarded eyes she saw something raw, something that frightened him more than failure ever could. Feeling. Her voice softened. "Julian." He cupped her face carefully, as if afraid she might break. "I know this complicates everything," he murmured. "I know we work together. I know it's wrong, and—" She rose on her toes and kissed him. It was not polished or perfect. It was hesitant, trembling, filled with exhaustion and unspoken truths. But it was real. For the first time, Julian let the walls fall, if only for a moment. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Julian had known. Amara returned to New York, but distance did not silence them. Every evening, when work was done, he called. At first, it was to ask about her father's recovery. Soon, it became something more. She told him about the stars over Colorado, about her mother's stubborn garden, about the porch swing where she sat as a child. He told her small things he had never noticed before, his driver humming jazz under his breath, his assistant's habit of angling his coffee cup the same way every morning. Their conversations slipped past business into the quiet corners of life. And in those corners, Julian felt something he had never allowed himself to feel: ease. When Amara laughed, he caught himself smiling. When she asked about his day, he wanted to answer honestly. The man who had built walls of steel now found himself wanting to open doors. He realized with quiet astonishment he no longer wanted to perform. He wanted to live, and for the first time he wondered if living meant being real with her. On a Friday evening, Julian appeared in the conference room doorway as Amara packed her sketches. "Have dinner with me," he said. She gestured at the takeout boxes scattered across the table. "We just had dinner." "Not work, not takeout. Dinner," he clarified. Later, he led her to a small Italian place tucked underground on the Lower East Side. The red checkered tablecloths, the aroma of bread still warm from the oven, everything was far from the luxury he usually flaunted. "I used to come here with a friend years ago," Julian admitted. "I remembered it." Amara studied him, then smiled softly. "So tonight you didn't bring me somewhere to impress me?" "No." His voice was steady. "I brought you somewhere that felt real." They ate simple pasta, shared wine, and spoke not of contracts but of dreams. Amara confessed she could never do casual. Julian listened, then reached for her hand across the table. "I don't want casual either," he said. "Not with you." It was not a grand gesture, but in that small restaurant, with flowers still dusting the waiter's apron, a quiet truth was spoken. The taxi climbed to Julian's tower, the glass building that scraped the Manhattan sky. His penthouse opened with polished silence. Floor-to-ceiling windows, furniture like museum pieces, art without warmth. Amara walked slowly inside, her eyes sharp but kind. "It's beautiful," she said, then paused. "But it doesn't look like anyone lives here." Julian tried to smile, but it faltered. "I travel a lot. I avoid things that tie me down." She touched the edge of a glass table. "Or things that remind you you're human." Her words hit deeper than she knew. The emptiness of the space reflected the emptiness inside him, every surface perfect, every corner silent. "I live ready to disappear," he admitted at last. The confession tasted bitter, but freeing. Amara stepped closer, her presence softening the cold air. "You don't have to disappear with me here," she said. Julian's chest tightened. No one had ever spoken to him that way. No one had looked past the empire and into the man. That night, his penthouse ceased to be only a fortress. For the first time, someone had dared to call it, and him, empty. They sat on the couch, the city spread below in lights and silence. Amara tucked her legs beneath her, wine forgotten in her hand. Julian's gaze lingered, heavy with unspoken truth. He drew in a breath, then let the words fall. "I think I'm falling in love with you, and it terrifies me." Silence stretched. Amara's eyes softened, not with shock but with understanding. "Being terrified isn't always bad," she said gently. "Sometimes it just means it matters." Julian looked at her, every mask stripped away. He was not the empire now, not the billionaire in control. He was a man confessing fear, craving connection. Amara reached across the space, laying her hand on his. "You don't have to be fearless, Julian. You just have to be honest." For a long moment, he could only breathe, the city pulsing beneath them like a heartbeat. Then he drew her into his arms. The kiss they shared was not tentative. It was full of surrender, of risk, of the fragile courage to believe in love. And for Julian Cross, fear had never felt so alive. For 3 months, their world shrank into something private and fragile. No tabloids, no public dinners, no headlines. Just quiet mornings and late nights. Julian slipped from meetings to call Amara. She sent him sketches of cabins, staircases, small details that carried her touch. He laughed more in those months than he had in the last decade. They built a rhythm, shared breakfasts, walks in the park when the city lights softened, hours curled together in his penthouse where the emptiness no longer felt suffocating. They did not speak of forever, but every glance carried its promise. In Amara's presence, Julian found not distraction, but peace. For once, love was not weakness, it was refuge. And yet, beneath the sweetness, Julian felt a tremor. The more he let her in, the more he feared losing everything if she left. He carried the fear silently, hoping she never saw it. But Amara noticed. She always did. She touched his hand one night and whispered, "Stop thinking. Just be here." For 3 months, he tried. For 3 months, he almost believed happiness could last. It was a Thursday when Amara placed the test on the counter. 2 lines. Clear. Unmistakable. Her breath caught. She touched her stomach, overwhelmed by fear and awe. She had never planned this, never imagined carrying a child. But as shock faded, determination grew. This was her choice. Her child. Her responsibility. When she told Julian, his reaction cut deep. He froze, color draining from his face. "A child?" His voice trembled with disbelief. "Amara, this could destroy everything. The press, the investors, my board." "It's not about them," she said firmly. "It's about life, about us." Julian turned away, pacing. Fear coiled inside him, sharper than any deal he had ever risked. He thought of his parents, of sudden loss, of how love made life fragile. The idea of fatherhood felt like a chain around his chest. "I can't." His words broke. Amara's heart cracked, but her resolve did not. "Then I'll do this alone." In that moment, 2 lives shifted. One chose courage, the other chose fear, and between them grew a distance that love alone could not bridge. The days that followed were hollow. Amara moved back to Brooklyn, her heart heavy but resolute. She carried the life inside her as both burden and blessing. Julian buried himself in work. Meetings stacked on meetings, contracts signed without joy. At night, he drowned in whiskey, staring at city lights that once symbolized triumph but now looked like cold stars. Weeks later, Amara collapsed in her small apartment. The hospital confirmed what she already feared. She had lost the baby. The word miscarriage sliced through her like a blade. She wept silently, alone. Her mother held her, but no comfort could fill the emptiness. The child, who had barely begun now, belonged only to memory. Julian heard through a brief, stilted call. He said nothing. He felt everything. Guilt clawed at him, yet pride kept him from reaching out. Instead, he drank more, hid deeper. His empire stood unshaken, but inside, he crumbled. Love had asked him to be brave. He had chosen fear. Now he was left with silence, a glass in his hand, and the haunting knowledge that his choices had cost him both Amara and the child they would never meet. 6 months passed. The distance between them felt final. Amara rebuilt quietly, keeping her grief close. Julian buried himself deeper, but no deal erased the ache. Then, one night, his phone rang. A number from Denver. A nurse's voice on the line. "Mr. Cross? She's in labor. You need to come. And it's twins." Julian's glass slipped from his hand, shattering on marble. "Twins?" His voice was hoarse. "That's impossible. I thought—" "She carried to term. She's in critical condition. If you want to see them, come now." He stood frozen, his empire meaningless in that moment. Fear surged like fire through his veins. The woman he had abandoned, the life he thought gone, suddenly both waited for him in a hospital room. For the first time in years, Julian Cross ran. Through hallways, to the waiting car, to the jet fueled for midnight flight. Every second echoed with one truth: he might already be too late. The man who had chosen power over love now raced against fate, desperate to hold on to the only thing that could still save him: family. The hospital room was chaos. Alarms, masked nurses, the sharp command of doctors. Amara lay pale under harsh lights, her breath ragged. One infant had already been delivered. The second was in distress, the cord wrapped cruelly. Julian burst through the doors, security trailing behind. He froze at the sight of her, then surged forward. "Save them!" he demanded, his voice breaking. "Save my family, whatever it takes." The surgeon glanced up, steady. "We need to operate now. Consent?" Julian's hand trembled as he signed. Every fortune he had built meant nothing in that moment. All that mattered was 3 fragile lives fighting for breath. Minutes felt like hours. He pressed his forehead against the glass, whispering prayers he had never believed in. His empire could not control this. His power could not command life. Then a cry pierced the silence. Thin, desperate, alive. One twin, then another. 2 voices, ragged but real. Julian's knees buckled. Tears blurred his vision. He had nearly lost them, and in that moment he knew he would never let them go again. A nurse placed the swaddled infants in his arms. Julian looked down at them, their tiny faces scrunched, their cries filling the sterile air. His chest shattered open. "I'm your dad," he whispered, voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I should have been here sooner. I will never leave you again." Tears fell freely, unchecked. For the first time, Julian Cross wept without shame. When he looked up, Amara's eyes met his. She was weak, her face pale, but her gaze was steady. In that look, he saw forgiveness he did not deserve and love he thought lost forever. He moved closer, laying the twins gently beside her. "I was a coward," he said, choking on the truth. "But if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving I can be the man you and our children deserve." Amara's hand found his. Tears slid from her eyes, mingling with his. "Then be here," she whispered. He pulled a small box from his pocket, clumsy with trembling hands. "Marry me, Amara." In that room of cries and tears, her answer came not in words, but in the way she held his hand and refused to let go. Sunlight spilled across Aspen Ridge, now complete. The resort stood proud among the mountains, wood and stone blending with sky and pine. But inside, the true legacy was not architecture. Laughter echoed through the lobby. 2 toddlers chased each other across polished floors, their small feet slapping against the stone. Julian followed clumsily, catching one in his arms while the other clung to Amara's dress. "Slow down," he called, laughing. The sound surprised him still. Light, unguarded. Mara smiled, her hand brushing his. "They're just like you, always running toward the impossible." He kissed her forehead, the empire forgotten in that moment. For years, his life had been measured in profit margins and stock prices. Now, it was measured in giggles, bedtime stories, and the warmth of family dinners. The resort had opened to acclaim, a triumph by every measure. But to Julian, its greatest success was that it stood as proof of change. He had not only built walls and roofs, he had built a home. For the first time, Julian Cross no longer feared disappearing. He had roots now, and they were 2 children with his eyes and 1 woman who had saved his soul. The story of Julian Cross was not about wealth, not about power, not even about redemption. It was about a man who discovered that love was not weakness, but the very thing that made life worth living. This was not the tale of a billionaire transformed by romance. It was the story of love, revealing the man he had always been, buried under fear and pride. And maybe it is your story too. Have you ever almost lost someone you loved because fear told you it was safer to walk away? If so, then you understand the truth Julian learned too late. Money fades, reputations shift, but love endures. It demands courage, and it demands presence. Tonight, somewhere, another Amara is carrying her grief alone. Somewhere, another Julian hides behind his empire, and somewhere, a family waits for one choice, the choice to love, even when it terrifies. If this story touched your heart, share it in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next journey into love, loss, and the moments that remind us what really matters.